I am leaning into adaptability. Every single day when a new idea comes up or a new technology comes out or a new, paradigm or way of thinking as it relates to artificial intelligence, that's something that like you have to embrace. I'm not saying you have to accept and you have to say that's good, but like you must understand how to use this technology and how it's impacting you. And I think that if there's like one metric that's going to propel you in your career or what you're doing, it's your ability to adapt to that technology more quickly than the people around you.
One of the more common slang terms from crypto is WAGMI. You don't really ever say it out loud, but it's WAGMI, or we're all going to make it. And this is a sentiment that is often shared when prices are appreciating and everyone is getting so rich. Something that, however, my friend Grant always says, my co-host from Not Crypto Bros and good friend of mine, he says, only patience is going to make it. And I would like to say after this episode, I think we can add on to something about adaptability. Like only those who are adaptable are going to make it. And in the world of AI and in the future we're stepping into where AI will be teaching AI to improve, that seems pretty salient. On this episode, we're going to dive into the conundrum of employment in a world of AI. And we're also going to talk about the future of creation and creativity. This episode will be the third installment of my conversations with Andy. We've been meeting up once every 3 months to talk about AI. So we started 6 months ago, episode 1. About 3 months ago is episode 2. This is episode 3, and we'll meet back up in the fall for episode 4. If you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, I highly recommend that you go and check them out. When I look at More Than Blockchain's analytics, they are 2 of the most listened to episodes. So AI is here, it's intriguing, and I really think everyone should learn about it. And as you're going to hear from my guest today, Andy Bryant, AI adaptability is truly the new superpower. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is More Than Blockchain. Andy Bryant, welcome back to More Than Blockchain. This is your 3rd time back on the pod. How are you?
Do I get a prize? How does this work?
You know, that's a really good question. Maybe you'll get some swag.
T-shirt? Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, t-shirts. This is like the YMCA.
It's why I do it. It's why I get up in the morning.
You know, it's always so weird whenever you sign up for Planet Fitness.
Oh yeah.
And you've done this because I know you've lived in Brooklyn for a while and everyone goes to Planet Fitness.
Exactly.
You're like, you get a t-shirt. Hey. No one wears those t-shirts. It's a pipeline direct to Goodwill, you know?
That's tough.
Anyway, I don't know how we got there, but you're back on. This is the 3rd installation of talking about AI.
Yeah.
And I want to go right in if you're ready.
Let's do it, man. I'm in.
So you and I recently were in Boston.
Yep.
And we went to a Red Sox game. And before we went to the Red Sox game, we stopped at a bar and we had a beer. We met up and we ran into this bartender who's pretty young, maybe 22, 23, more or less. She just finished undergraduate work. And she's going to start nurse school.
A nursing program, yeah.
A nursing program, right. And it's an accelerated nursing program. And she's got her seemingly whole life figured out. And she was really great to talk to. And when we brought up the fact that we have a podcast, our podcast, on AI.
I'm going around telling people that it's our podcast.
Exactly. And we, started talking to her about our podcast. She said a bunch of things. But one of the things you said was like being a nurse is great because it's likely not something that's going to be replaced. And that's kind of where I want to start and build a framework that's obviously going to change, and it will change even after we record this episode. So this is the 3rd episode that we've done, and I would invite anyone listening to this, if you enjoyed this episode, go back and listen to the first 2 episodes. I think Andy has really good nuggets of information there about AI. And in the 2nd episode is where you brought up this idea, and it will always stick with me, that what AI is going to be really good at replacing is this simple idea of search and synthesis. And so if you're in a position of employment right now where you're doing a lot of search and then synthesizing, that may be something that AI is just going to run rickshaw over. And that's kind of rough the way I just said that. But the point is that may be a place where AI is just better than humans at the same work. And that's something interesting. So let's talk about nursing. And you said something between nurses and doctors and how that may look. So in the 2nd episode, we talked about search and synthesis. In this episode, let's look at more I think we're going to get into like the decision making versus the care element. And that's probably the first place we'll start between a doctor and a nurse, those two positions. So I'm going to pass you the mic and we'll see what happens.
Oh yeah, no. So what did we say? I mean, basically, she was talking about using ChatGPT to write her papers, for undergraduate, and her boyfriend, just puts the take home exam into ChatGPT, and it got a perfect answer, and it's like, okay, that's your impression of AI, like that's great, right? But what I did say was like, I think the doctors will be replaced before nurses do, and she looked at me like, wait, like what are you even talking about, right? And listen, obviously that's still to be seen, right? But end of the day, I think it's pretty counterintuitive for folks because, they think of kind of the old school perspective of a doctor is like they're learned, they are, they got the white coats, they're in a position of authority and management and that sort of thing. But end of the day, a lot of what obviously this is speaking very generally about the medical profession, but what a lot of doctors, a big portion of the training and specialization is about decision making, right? And decision making related to specific pieces of data, right? Now, of course, there's going to be intuitive stuff that we can't just pass off to machines, and of course, there's going to be levels of care that many doctors bring. And so, end of the day, obviously, what a doctor does is multifaceted, but a lot of the time that people spend, a lot of the training that people go through, is very much related to decision making in light of data, right? That's visual data because we have amazing eyes, right? That is, looking at spreadsheets and looking at charts and those sorts of things. But what we've seen is that there are a number of startups and there are a number of people out there doing research that suggests that a lot of these tasks can be automated. And so, it's funny. So I've been really interested in the economics of AI, and there's a great professor. His name's Daniel Rock, I think, at University of Pennsylvania and Wharton. And basically, he's looking at what are the actual tasks associated with a position. And, when it comes to being a doctor, obviously you're going to have, folks who are giving people bad news and, sitting down with folks and, giving them care. But there are also times where they're, just looking at radiology reports and those sorts of things. And so those are the sorts of tasks that I think that we can start to abstract away and put into, an algorithm. And I think the market forces are going to be there because end of the day, 12 years of education is expensive and healthcare is as well. I wonder if there's going to be an economic force that kind of pushes us over that ledge to the point that we have nurses who are, given these tools to make a lot of those decisions, or at least, do a lot of that inference that then empowers them to provide better care on their own.
This is just so amazing. And I think that we're at such a weird point in history because everything you've just said, and I want to go back to the first thing you said about education. You said, here we have these people that are learned, right? When they graduate, they have the big hats on and they have the robes and they're at the front. They're even beyond the masters, right? They're getting their doctorates, whether it's in law, whether it's in legalese, if we focus on just lawyers and doctors, or they're getting their doctorate of medicine. And it's almost like in the world we're headed to, the more formal education you have, the more likely you are to be replaced. Because the other side of that, and this is just a quick anecdote, I have another podcast called Not Crypto Bros, and one of the guys on Not Crypto Bros is 43. So he's a little bit older than I am. And then one of the guys is just turned 25. So he is like a perfect Gen Zer. And he always offers interesting insights into how his generation, and it's tough to say one person can be ambassador for their generation, but he said something today on the live show. And he said, when I think about the future, and we were talking about crypto specifically, but we were talking about crypto and AI almost in the same breath. He said he plays rugby and he's up in Canada and he has a bunch of other friends that are more or less around his age group. And he said a lot of these kids who are the youngest on the team, there's like 18, 19-year-olds, and they could go to university. He said there's 10 kids. And he said of those 10 kids, the decisions they're making moving forward, I've talked to them, are directly impacted by crypto when it comes to financial. That's where they're putting their money as opposed to stocks. And then when it comes to their work, they're looking at AI and they're like, I don't want to have to, I can't beat King Kong. And AI is King Kong for them. And so he said, of these 10 kids who are thinking about going to university, 6 of them are going to the trades. They want to go figure out how to build a house because while they know that maybe that could be replaced by machines eventually, just like the way automation and the way we build cars, for example, like we will figure out a way to use machines to do mostly everything, right? In my opinion. But the fact that 60% of them, and this is just a small subset, it's an anecdote, we can take it and we can use that data the way we want. The fact that 6 of them are like, I'm not going to try to beat King Kong. I don't want to try to beat AI. I'm going to learn how to be an electrician, a plumber, a carpenter, an engineer, do those type of things, hands on. And another one of my co-hosts said, I have many people that are now looking at this and basically saying, I am only at the value in which my hands can bring value, right? But when we think about the doctorate of either, the lawyer or the doctor, they're being paid for their brains right now. They're being paid for their proof of work, which has come out in the years that they put in education and experience. And so it's almost like the paradigm of the way that we've kind of grown up. If we grew up and we were little kids and someone's dad was a lawyer or a doctor, you're like, oh, wow. But in 5 to 10 years, it might be like, oh, wow. Like, I'm kind of worried about your financial future if your dad's a lawyer and that's where the income's coming in. So I wanted to throw that as a kind of a, does that play in with like the data and decisions? And now also go to, if you could extrapolate more on what you were saying at the end there about how you think a nurse could use AI to maybe be a better nurse and almost start to take some of the data and decision making that the doctors were making, because you're saying what the nurse has is something that maybe AI can't have now, maybe in the future. There's the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, and that's what I was thinking about. But what you're talking about is the bedside manner, the human touch, the empathy, the care, the IRL when a nurse holds your hand in the hospital because you have pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea that every profession is going to be impacted by AI, I think is true. However, some more so than others. For example, you might not want a robot cutting your hair, right? You might not want a robot talking to you about, your childhood. I think the same is true of nurses, right? In these environments, not only is it just difficult for locomotion to occur, in such an ER or in these other spaces, but also you want a human there, right? And so I do think that the folks who are, using their hands, who are moving, who are actually, in these spaces and providing care are in a way, more future proofed in the long run. I don't think that's happening, in the very short term. But, end of the day, I still think obviously that doctors bring a lot to the table. But you just, if you were to break down the tasks that they do day to day, how many of them can't be, put into an algorithm somewhere, right? So it really makes me, when I think about the kids that you just talked about, I can't imagine what it's like to be 18, 19 years old right now and be looking up at the rest of your career thinking, well, what isn't going to be solved by artificial intelligence, right? It reminds me, there's a short story by Borges, The Library of Babylon. Basically it's like this ever extensive library where everything that has ever been thought has ever, everything has ever been written, the collection of the collection of the letters, right? And the young generations are like tormented by the fact that anything they could possibly think has already been said, right? And to the point where like expression becomes meaningless because there's a book that already has it in it. And I'm worried that we would have kids, saying that because I don't know. I mean, I'm not entirely optimistic about everything that's coming out, but end of the day, imagine if you had said in 1900, oh well, I hear about this new electricity thing. I better not go back to school because electricity is figured out, right? I mean, here we are 120 years later saying we still need these professions, we still need these people, right? And so, I do think that there's a very real sense of doom and gloom out there because ChatGPT can, like for this bartender's boyfriend, solve all these problems and answer all these questions. But end of the day, we still need people thinking. We still need people making decisions, and that applies to doctors and to nurses. So to your other question about what nurses might be able to do, for example, I don't know if you grew up with what your healthcare situation was. For me, it was very much scattered so that like I would go to this doctor and they would say, oh, I got to refer you to a specialist. And then I'd get an x-ray. And then, a couple weeks later, I would get the x-ray results. And then, this and this and this and that, until we've started to get to the point where medicine is more in one environment and those sorts of things for the people who have that privilege. And all of a sudden you're getting a x-ray results right away. You're getting a diagnosis right away. You're getting these sorts of things. That is so expensive. That is so difficult to find throughout the world, except for in these like Western educated rich environments and the Eastern educated rich environments, those sorts of things. What if we had nurses who were able to have those sorts of capabilities in rural areas, that could do an x-ray, that could do immediate diagnostic, that could do best in the world class diagnosis of certain issues? much like you would think of as a calculator who's able to do world-class calculations for you, right? If we did, if we were able to empower these people with these sorts of tools, I think the idea of healthcare would change dramatically to the point that a lot like we had doctors going door to door. It's like you could have someone who has just a few years of what we think of as formal education, but a lifelong of understanding how to care for people, empowered by these tools, being able to actually bring care, to the people in the places that need it most, rather than saying, "Oh, we just need to build a multi-million-dollar hospital, on every street corner in every city in order to provide this care." I don't think so. If we can get radiology reports like that, let's do it. And if we can empower the people who do have the hands and do have the care, let's do that.
I absolutely love that. And when you just talk about how, hey, we don't need to build this multi-million-dollar hospital, it flips the entire paradigm of the way at least the United States
Yeah.
healthcare is set up, because it's set up for not having super healthy people or super sick people. We want people that are dependent upon the care and essentially the medicine, because that's where the pharma comes in. And when I think about that, that is a scary future. And that promise right there, I know is a billion-dollar idea, because what you just said what was Elizabeth Holmes'
Yep.
pitch
Yep.
for Theranos.
Yeah, Theranos. Yeah.
Theranos,
Yep.
thank you. Which was basically like, what if everyone could do all their blood testing in their house,
Yeah.
and we could sell a kit for $300?
Yeah.
Let's go to that future.
Yep.
Let's live in the future you've just described, where someone could come to your home who does not have a doctorate or an MD, but has been a lifelong caregiver.
Yep.
And they can show up and they work for this company, and that company basically has the LLM that can do all of this specific health work. What does that world look like? Where do doctors in that world? Because we focused right now kind of on the juxtaposition of employment between nurses and doctors. So in that world, where do doctors play a role?
I think this is precisely my point, right? So Theranos was, I think, in contrast to what we're talking about right now, saying that they wouldn't automate the decision-making process. They wouldn't automate some of the, what I think of as like sort of high cognitive training tasks. They would automate the actual physical task of drawing blood and doing something with it. In contrast, I'm saying like, no, we still need vials of blood. Like we still need stethoscopes. We still need radiology. What it seems that we're headed towards is a world in which the other side of it is something that we can empower with these automated tools, which is, well, the results of that blood test have a certain pattern, and what can we do with it, right? And so when we talk about someone coming to your house, and they're able to, have these sort of diagnostic tools that they bring to you, I'll flip the script and say, no one needs to come to your house. You have it at home, right? I mean, what is the Uber for healthcare, right? Where we're starting to say, like, here we are in our little neighborhood, and oh, the guy next door, like, oh, he has that app, or oh, this person over here has that. Is that going to be legal? No way. Like, is that going to be something that I would sanction? Like, absolutely. I cannot say for sure. However, when every single person on the planet with an internet connection can be a contributor to overall health care, at the end of the day, that is going to bring big pharma and big hospitals and the idea of putting yourself through 12 years of education to its knees. There's going to be market forces that push us in a direction that I certainly can't predict. But I do know that when more people have the power to diagnose themselves or treat themselves, or get a sense of what they should be doing with their lives and with their health, and have the power to actually do it, that's really going to transform the way that it works from the bottom up.
When you started to say that, I was like, Andy, that's crazy, right? Because how is that going to work? And what I was thinking, and I want you to correct me, but it's almost like if everyone that uses this diagnostic tool in the future allows then that tool to add in their diagnosis and their particular symptoms into the system to continue to better the information, then it will help everyone. And I'm like, that's crazy. That wouldn't work. But we already kind of have something that's similar to
We
that
totally have that.
in a very analog, which is organ donors, which is kind of the similar thing, where I am, in some sense, I am trying to support people I'll never meet with the decision I've made, right? On some sense, right? Now, I know it's a little bit different. Obviously, if I have strep throat and I use this diagnostic tool, it tells me I have strep throat, and that's based off 3 million other cases, looking at my symptoms, giving me the check that it gives me. It's going to say, hey, with a 99.9.8%, we believe this is strep. You should start this antibiotic routine. Right. And then I add into that. Okay, so now I'm helping out the data for future people's uses. So in that way, it's kind of like this gets into crypto a little bit, but it's a decentralized network of support and data.
Yeah.
That's helping everyone.
Yeah.
But no one controls it in theory. Now,
Yeah.
we could get into who owns the LLM there, but is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, so let me make an analogy. Think about, you ever heard of the concept of like a neighborhood quilt, where like, people will get together, they all make one square, everyone on the house, everyone on the block makes one. If we go back a few hundred years, let's say there is a neighborhood, what we think of as a neighborhood, where this house makes one, another house makes one. They're using thread, they're using needles, they're using dye, they're using things that they can't make themselves, right? Maybe one person has the wool, maybe one person, knows a metalsmither, that sort of thing. But end of the day, they're using technology that someone else developed in order to make something that is based on their community needs at the time, right? So none of them are, master, woodworkers, master needle pointers, master whatever, but they're empowered by this technology. What is the neighborhood quilt version of healthcare, right? What is the neighborhood quilt version of, getting a law degree, or, going back to school or whatever? What does it mean when literally every single person has that technology that they can get through the mail or get through the internet or, get through the air to make a product that doesn't have an owner, that doesn't have a corporate entity, that doesn't have any of these things coming in? Because listen, you got the thread, you got the needle, you got the quilt, like you built it yourselves. And I think that that's what is happening right now, because end of the day, with an LLM, you can build these sorts of things on your own. And the idea that a single company, like, I won't name any, but, a major social media network or a major ride sharing app or, whatever is going to own that. I just don't see it in the future where literally anyone can build this stuff just by talking to a machine.
I see that future and it's crazy. How far away timelines, because this is like what everyone's thinking, right? I think
Sure.
everyone's like, if you think about the climate crisis, people are constantly like, oh, should I buy beachside property? And they're
Right.
thinking about the timeline. Well, I don't know. Maybe in 10 years there's going to be a tsunami. Maybe in 10 years there's going to be a hurricane. Maybe there's going to be an earthquake here. Everyone is always, and much of what you said earlier about the doctor is just basically my education allows me to make this decision. And we're just talking about risk. I am able to look at this and make and understand the risk, the cost, the cost benefit,
Yeah.
the chances of it working out. And that's
Yeah.
what most doctors are doing on some level.
Yep.
So you see, now you're kind of like the CYA, the cover your ass, or the risk guy for the AI. How soon or how far away do you think that world is where someone's going to create that type of healthcare thing that anyone can sign up for, download on their phone, use their new Apple glasses or whatever, and kind of tap into? Like, let's not focus on the hardware. I want to
Yeah.
focus just on the software, because I do think there's a hardware component there where you're going to need something to, I don't know, more than just a camera potentially.
Sure.
But if we just focus on the software, how far away do you think we are? And I know that that's unreasonable to not focus on hardware and software.
Just to take a step back, there's a couple premises I somewhat reject. Like, I don't think we're going to be getting this from Apple, right? I don't think we're going to be getting this from the big companies, right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. So I was going to say, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in my head right now, the only thing I can see is what Apple's doing with the goggles and certain other hardware to be able to interact. I agree. But continue with the premises, though, because I need you to break down the premises, because I'm living on wild assumptions here. So I need you to bring me back down.
The doctor in a box is, something that the Google's going to have a hard time with the legal department, selling that. What I'm seeing is a major trend right now in open source with a lot of these, let's talk about large language models, right? So, everyone, fell in love with ChatGPT, and, they're seeing their numbers go down recently. And it's so funny because the speculators are like, oh, because the AI hype is dying down. It's like, dude, they were first out of the gate, and now there's literally thousands of other companies doing exactly the same thing, and their numbers went down like 8%. Like, no, dude, like they still have market share if that's absolutely incredible. But so we're talking about large language models. What we're seeing is that the people today are more empowered when it comes to artificial intelligence technologies than ever before as it relates to what these sort of community-driven models can do. Obviously, the meta models are going to be the best. Obviously, the OpenAI models are going to be the best. Obviously, the Google models are going to be the best. But if that's an A+, we can still get to a B+, A- with the stuff that we just kind of build ourselves, right? I don't think that we're going to get the same returns forever. I do think that we're seeing some slowdowns in the open source community. But I do think that it just like you said, the genie's kind of out of the bottle here, and you know, it's going to be hard to kind of put a lid on the people who do want to ask their homegrown community version of ChatGPT, whether or not they think that this is skin cancer, given the picture that they upload, right? And so, when you talk about timelines, it's really hard to say, but I think that the trajectory is such that we are seeing that sort of, again, economic pressure very quickly. I think that we're going to be seeing federal mandates and statewide legislation that says like, hey, don't treat yourself at home, certainly within the next 5 years. And we're seeing people, starting to do that today. We're talking about biohackers. We're talking about people who are getting, certain prescriptions, from overseas, through loopholes and that sort of thing. That's not something I condone. I'm not, suggesting that it's positive. But I do think that there's something to be said about having that economic pressure, pushing back on the people who are saying, if I go to the doctor, it's going to cost me $12,000, right? What do we do in response given the ability of open source technologies today? One other thing actually on timelines are tough, especially in this game. We're starting to hockey stick here where we're seeing just an exponential growth where truly, models are training new models, right? Models that have trained on models are training other models. Like there's a compounding factor here. Every industry is now using this sort of stuff. What I'll say is that like for those kids who are worried about where they're going to put their money and what job they should pursue, that sort of thing. I have less to say about what's going to happen in 10 years. I have, certainly less to say about what's going to happen in 15 or 20. And I think that anyone who has a strong opinion about that is just not giving the right information. But what I will say is what I'm doing today. And what I'm doing today is I am leaning into adaptability. Every single day when a new idea comes up or a new technology comes out or a new, paradigm or way of thinking as it relates to artificial intelligence, that's something that like you have to embrace. I'm not saying you have to accept and you have to say that's good, but like you must understand how to use this technology and how it's impacting you. And I think that if there's like one metric that's going to propel you in your career or what you're doing, it's your ability to adapt to that technology more quickly than the people around you. Rather than saying, oh, I got my degree from this school 20 years ago, which means I'm really established. It's like, what did you do yesterday? Are you incorporating the latest model that Google just put out? Those sorts of things. And so embracing complexity and embracing adaptability today, whatever the timelines happen to be, I think that's the best thing that you can be doing.
I'm glad you touched upon that because I wanted to go kind of in that similar direction, which is like we've talked about maybe the people, and I just think that's maybe a good framework. If you are getting paid to CYA, if you are getting paid to make decisions that affect other people, and that's the primary reason why you're getting paid more than others, you may be in trouble for AI.
What do you mean?
Meaning like CEOs, right? If their big thing is just making decisions for the future of the company based on data, that may be a reason, like that may not shelter them in the future. Their 35 years of experience at this company and the fact that they have a master's degree or whatever it is.
Gotcha.
Whatever they did yesterday may not matter tomorrow if there is an LLM or there is technology that essentially can do what make that decision better.
Mm-hmm.
I guess is that. And do you agree with that on some level?
Yeah. I wonder about the CEO thing, just because I think that there's something to be said about kind of in vitro, a decision can be made by a model in some sort of simulation, and it's better than a human. Totally get that. But how do we apply it, right? And if you went around town telling people, hey, we have a robot CEO, right? And obviously I'm using the term robot like pretty, in a silly way here.
In a pejorative manner.
Yeah. But like what would that mean? Now, there's a company in Japan who's literally doing that right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we've spoken about that off mic, which is a fascinating thing. Sure.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, well, wait a second. Maybe that's a benefit, right? But imagine if Johnson & Johnson was like, we are turning all decision-making power over to something that we don't control. I think that would have, again, talking about market force, have a serious impact. Because again, it's not about the quality of the decisions being made. It's about the quality that people ascribe to the decisions that they're perceiving, right? And so it's like if you went into the doctor or you were taking off in a plane or you were doing something, it's like wait a second, there isn't a human behind the wheel. It's like that to me is going to be the biggest barrier for entry when it comes to automating a lot of these tasks. Not that the tasks can't get automated, but how quickly are people going to be able to move, their perspective on it such that the market can actually respond to it?
So if you're listening to this and you've had this happen in your life, I've had this happen. We've all had this happen. So what you're basically describing, and please correct me when I'm wrong here. Call my premises out, because I think if I make comments and I don't call out all the assumptions, then it just doesn't work out for people to like try to picture in their
Sure.
mind. I could tell you, Andy, I don't like your car, right? Your car smell. Andy, I get in your car and I say, dude, your car kind of smells. I don't think
I can
anything
see
of
that.
it.
Yeah,
And it doesn't. I'm not calling you out,
I can
but
see that.
I don't say anything else. And then the next day, you're gonna go get it detailed. You're like, all right, whatever. I'm gonna go clean it. But it turns out your wife has been telling you that for 6 months.
Mhm.
But I happen to tell you, and for some reason, it coming from me didn't feel like it was, her giving you a hard time or her just like busting you up or whatever. And maybe you'll take that. Like we've all done this. If you're a human being, somebody will tell you something. Like your best friend will tell you something, and you hear it from somebody else. It doesn't matter, and it changes your mind. And this happens a lot if you've ever worked at a company. You will bring an idea to your superior, unless you're the CEO, and then you have to talk to the board. And you'll say, hey, I think if we did this, we would actually earn more money, or this would be more efficient, or I would be happier. No change happens. Somebody else happens to do it, and because they have a master's, they have a doctorate, they're a consultant, right? All of a sudden, everyone's listening now, and they make the change.
Right.
Is that kind of what you're saying? It's like if you had the CEO of Tesla all of a sudden be AI, it wouldn't be as accepted. The perception of the intelligence wouldn't be as good as if Elon Musk, who has been the CEO and people do inherently trust in the EV space to do what he's done, essentially. Is that what you're saying? Even if they make the same decision?
Yeah, totally. I mean, humans care about provenance, right?
Exactly.
And there's evolutionary pressure, on folks that suggest this really strongly, that like it's not that we're just seeing food. We care about where that food came from so that we can actually not get poisoned, right? And so we see this with, fine art, right? It's like, oh, well, who painted it, right? It's like we see that with violins. It's like, oh, who made it? Who played it? Like, oh, do you care about this guitar? Well, actually, Eric Clapton, made this with his bare hands. And it's like, well, then it's going to be more expensive. Right? It's the same guitar, right? Like, and so I think that we are seeing the same thing with decision making and with some of these automated tasks. For example, studies have shown, again, it's early days, so I'm not going to say like conclusively, but studies have shown, I find to be pretty compelling, that roads are safer with automated cars on them, right? Traffic is lower, communication is easier, congestion, drops down, accidents drop down, but what do people see? They see the one headline, every, couple weeks that's like, oh, this accident happened and it was an automated vehicle and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that like EV, automated vehicles are perfect, right? In some cases, I think, especially in the city of San Francisco, like they're actually a pretty big problem, like given how many startups just want to like get on the road and like mess around and that sort of thing. But I think that the biggest hurdle to automating the key decision-making processes in our society aren't going to be the ability of systems to actually do them. It's going to be the people allowing them to happen. And so that's where we are today, kind of pushing back against public perception of what it means for a plane to take off and land itself, or a surgeon to not be in the room when we're being operated on, and those sorts of things. And I think that that's going to be, something that we're going to be dealing with. Talking about timeline for a good, I don't think that we're going to see the general population embrace this sort of stuff in the next 10 years.
That was my next question. When do you think the populace, humans, are going to accept this stuff? Because in many parts of the world, even in the United States, like let's not focus on the rest of the world, even in the United States, there are many people that still doubt tech, still question things. Even if it's like, I'm trying to think of, I want to think of a salient example to not just like make that kind of like bolder, almost generalization of a statement. Okay, science. Science is ugly. Science is essentially constantly evolving your thoughts based on your data around something.
Mhm.
And we've all just gone through this science experiment, which was the pandemic.
Right.
And when that happened, we had a large swath of people question the life out of everything that had to do with the pandemic. Now, not focusing on the vaccine, but just focusing on the pandemic, the fact that people were saying the pandemic wasn't real.
Yeah.
Right. So then how do you go from, that, and that just happened. This is still happening, right? Oh, the
Right.
pandemic wasn't real. It was created by somebody to control us. Da, 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 da,
Right.
da.
Right.
It seems to me that even in the United States, we are far from acquiescing to, you know what? I went to see the surgeon. The surgeon overruns this surgery AI tool. They actually were at home, but they are basically the ones on the responsibility ladder. If that doesn't work out, they get in trouble. But they've essentially like overseen that. But no, there was no one in the room, and I had my spleen operated on or something like that. How far along do you think we are from that not being like a one-off case that's on like the CNN ticker? Like, man was operated on by a surgeon who wasn't in the room. Like where that's just like the normal thing.
I think probably the biggest impediment to this sort of progress is going to be political factions. Folks who they make it their cause to say like, AI is racist or, AI is dangerous or, those sorts of things. I think there are many cases where all of that is true, right? But the blanket statement that, this stuff is going to kill us all and that sort of thing, I think that it requires just more nuance for us to actually figure out how to move forward. And unfortunately, as you're saying, we have lacked a lot of nuance when it comes to scientific debate in this country. It tends to be about, who's benefiting and who's not. Are my enemies being hurt by this technology? If so, then I'm for it. That sort of stuff. It's pretty difficult to watch. When you see this sort of stuff being talked about in the news, where by people who have no idea how it works, and just seeing that there is a very real possibility that for example, the Nuclear Commission in the United States, that was, I think it's called the Nuclear Commission, but the people responsible for regulating nuclear energy in the United States, they haven't approved a new nuclear power plant in like 4 or 5 decades, right? So there's a regulatory agency in this country who literally their job is to prevent nuclear energy from proliferating, right? And so, listen, you like nuclear energy, you don't, that's fine, but like I think that it's pretty clear that it's a positive thing, and I think that it should be explored. But what if we get an AI regulatory board that says, my uncle got denied a bank loan once, and it was because of AI, and ergo, I'm dedicating my career to preventing it from happening, right? It's these sorts of conversations that I'm really concerned that they're taking root right now, and they lack a lot of evidence, they lack a lot of support, but still it's governing how you and I are able to consume this, I think, really important resource moving forward. And so I do think that like getting more people in the game rather than saying I'm going to sit on the sidelines and just use my hands in a profession that, if you want to do that, that's totally fine. But being turned off by artificial intelligence simply because it's complicated, we need your mind on this is sort of where I'm coming from. We need everybody thinking about this in a way that like I'm going to benefit from what you have to say about it, even if you're railing against it or, we're disagreeing. Everybody has to contribute to this in the same way that everyone has to contribute to making sure that we have clean water. This is the next sort of clean water, clean air act that's going to come, out of this legislation. And I really hope that it's written properly.
This obviously aligns for those who are in crypto where crypto is right now because there's no regulatory clarity and because there's just murky water.
Yeah.
People are leaving the United States.
Mm.
Entrepreneurs are leaving the United States by the droves, and they're going to like United Arab Emirates, they're going to Dubai, they're going to El Salvador, they're going to Saudi Arabia, they're going to all these other places, which may not be the best places for if we think about it from a national security standpoint, for us to lose brain power to.
Right.
One of the biggest movies that's out right now is Oppenheimer.
Mm.
And one of the people who was a part of the Manhattan Project was Einstein, who fled Europe because of persecution. And we got that brain. We just happened to get that brain in the global transcourse, in the global transcourse of history.
Right.
We didn't get that brain, things may be different. And so I constantly think about our own brain drain now with crypto and then maybe AI as well, if regulation isn't supporting innovation, but kind of hindering it.
Yeah.
And there's something I kind of want to shift into. You just talked about fine art. And I saw this piece on Instagram or something or YouTube, and I thought it was brilliant. It said that and I had to look up these dates, but in 1822, photography kind of started. That's like when it came to people started like taking images and doing photography, and it was crazy, because before that, in order to capture a moment, you literally had to have a painter around. Like Andy and I are just going to go watch the Celtics. We need a painter to come with us to take our selfie, like with the court behind us, right? Like we can't imagine that world now because we all have ridiculous phones and cameras in our pocket. It said though that photography started, and shortly after photography started, obviously it took a while, you get to artists like Monet and Renoir, who are part of the Impressionist movement. And they came in and around 1850, 1860, 1870. And if you ever go to any museum, you'll probably see some kind of an Impressionist because it's fascinating. And the person was saying on the reel or the YouTube was that, look, the second photography came out and we were able to capture moments. Artists started to create things that couldn't be captured by a camera. And when I think about art and I think about more of the creative side of things, I'm wondering, and I wanted to ask you, what are the things we're going to create that AI can't create? Just like the way the Impressionists started to create things that could no longer be real. Because before that, there was a lot of art that was just whoever could paint the thing that looked most real won. But anyone could capture it seemingly, once anyone could capture it seemingly from a photo, then that didn't become the sexy thing to do. Then they had to create something that a photo could never capture. And they went to Impressionism. So for you, what do you think humans are going to create? And it doesn't necessarily need to be art, but I think that's probably where it will start, where artists are going to create stuff and they're like, AI can't do this. I don't know what that is necessarily, but I figured I'd ask you.
It makes me think of a couple of things. One, back in the 80s and 90s, artists used to tour so they could sell CDs, right? And, Spotify hits, BitTorrent, Napster, things like that. Obviously in the reverse order that I just said. But now artists sell CDs so they can tour, right? And it's a total phase shift where it's about the human interaction that is really, the core of what they're bringing to the table from an economic perspective. I think we're going to see a lot of these spaces that, I don't want to say that it's going to be like embracing the Luddite philosophy, but spaces that are specifically devoted to AI, powered sort of creation, right? Fast creation, building out murals, doing plays. I mean, I it's still one of the best things in my life is like being able to work with people and do some improv, do scenes together, that sort of thing. I'm not saying that AI can't do that, because we are going to get there very soon. But just the joy of working with other people, I think, is still going to that brings people joy, right? And that's going to be really important. So that's one side, just like kind of doing the human creation part. Two, I think that a lot of creators are gonna embrace AI in a way that so I'll give you an analogy. I think people are gonna embrace AI in a way that elevates what they think of as creation into a new medium, right? So if we think of apes or chimpanzees or bonobos, they can hear music, right? And to a certain extent, you'll even have like dogs like sing along, or bark, and that they can participate in what we think of as music. However, there's no way that they actually understand what the hell is going on, right? I mean, when we hear music, there's so much more happening in our brains than there is happening, for chimps and monkeys and things like that, right? What is the medium that has not been invented yet that is an analogy where we are the apes or the bonobos hearing the music and not fully understanding what's happening? I think that that's the sort of that's the sort of art that artificial intelligence is going to enable us to generate, where we are interacting with each other at hyperspeed and generating these sort of spaces where you can create and destroy and collaborate and understand at the speed of light much faster than we ever could, being sitting in a room together. Super vague, but end of the day, I think that we're going to have media that we cannot fully understand, from our perspective right now until we participate in it. And it's going to feel like a drug, being on speed, participating through the, artificial intelligence. And just to bring that point home, your point about Monet and Impressionism, they were still using a brush, whereas photography was using, silver nitrate. I think that AI, in a way, will become the brush, and the canvas will continue to be these sort of media that AI is building. and I'm pretty excited about it. I think I'm kind of leaning towards what people might think of as like a metaverse, and I'm not talking about like the metaverse where no one has feet or whatever, but the idea that we can create through this technology and have that empower the media, the actual medium that we're creating in, I think is the second way that I can see that actually, changing the way that media is created.
I think that's a great take. I mean, when you were talking there, I thought about the movie Inception,
Mhm.
because the movie Inception is like you have this separate world that you can step into and then do things that you can't do in the quote real world, and really push your creativity to realms that you can only see in your dreams, literally. And I think that if someone showed up here from the 16th century, they would think YouTube is Inception.
Sure, sure.
They'd be like, "What?"
Yeah.
They'd be like, "Wait, you guys can all work from like separate places around the world and be part of a team and build something on this thing called the internet?" So I definitely do think it's almost like what may seem like the difference between technology and magic is just time. So, and I think we've talked about that. What you've said about IRL, I couldn't agree more. Taylor Swift is one of the biggest concerts in history,
Oh yeah,
and
man.
people are dying to go to
Yeah.
these to see this person live.
Yeah.
The Weeknd also is one of the biggest tours in human history right now. And so there's the two musical artists. And in sports, Lionel Messi has just come to the MLS. And tickets used to be $45 to go to a game in Miami. They're over $600 because we want to get close to the reality, to the IRL.
Yeah.
We've all seen him if you're into soccer or sports. We've all seen him on Instagram and on YouTube and on Facebook. Just like everyone can hear Taylor Swift for free on YouTube.
Right.
But there's something about the IRL.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've said this before, but the more we get into a virtual world, you and I both work remote, the more we get into a virtual world, the more the IRL is going to become beyond precious.
Yeah.
Where it's like in 20 years, you and I go on a vacation and people are like, who is Andy? Oh my God, you must really care about that person.
Exactly.
Like that dude is
Yeah.
important in your life because you
Yeah.
took the goggles off, you put the phone down.
You left your house.
Yeah, you left your house. You got out of your basement where like you don't
Right.
leave, right? So I think that that's totally true. And I love what you've also said here about we're almost going to have to redefine the way we think about creation,
Mhm.
which I think has happened since the computer chip started, since we had Lisa, and since we had the beginning of the Apple, and we could like we could draw things digitally.
Right.
AI is going to allow us to do something like you're saying that maybe we can't fathom right now, but that's where we're going. So that's perfect. As we come to the end, a little wrap up. You've mentioned adaptability, basically being curious and agile as things come out onto the market.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you doing? Like, where do you go to find information about AI that allows you to stay agile?
Yeah, for sure. So I watch a lot of YouTube, do a lot of podcasts, read a lot of articles. I try my best to speak with people who are, actually doing this research. I tend to consume like 1, 2, or 3 hours of content a day related to artificial intelligence. And I'll tell you, I feel like I'm just getting left in the dust because every 24 hours I wake up and I feel like I'm living in a new world, with this new thing that came out and this, that. So I build a lot of chatbots for work and for what I'm doing on the side as well. And every day that I wake up and say, "Oh, I'm excited about this project. I'm doing it." I'll get a ping or I'll look up this thing and I'm like, "Shoot, like this tech's out of date." Like I and that's my own little thing where I have to like, oh, I always have the best, right? That sort of thing. But there's so much happening in this space that it's hard to feel like you are on top of it. And so I'll just go back to that and saying like the idea that you're going to be overwhelmed by the complexity and just this sort of like torrent that is all of the updates that are happening, try and eschew that, try and avoid that. Like if you can continue moving forward and try and be as adaptable as you can, that's the best piece of advice that I can give while still trying to read and view and consume as much as you can.
Any podcast that you want to shout out? It's weird to shout out another podcast on More Than Blockchain here, but any podcast or YouTube, like just the one thing that if I said you only have 1 week and this is the only thing you can consume for the week, and then after that you can get back in. But as you know, a week in AI could be like a month in the normal world, if not a year.
Crazy.
So is there one thing, just because I would love to leave people in the episode notes, a place where they can go and just start to learn.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm probably going to start to do, start asking of guests moving forward, because I do think every time I ask someone this question, and normally I talk to other podcasters, they give me the alpha. They'll give me something I've never heard of, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Now I don't see a world where I don't check in on that to learn something.
Right. So some of my favorite Robot Brains is really good. That's with a professor out of Berkeley who is huge into reinforcement learning. Interviews some really solid people, and it's directed towards his undergrads, and so it's like kind of a lower barrier for entry. I really like This Week in Machine Learning. They call it TWIML, another mostly machine learning podcast. Data Skeptic is great. That one is a little bit more heady. Gradient Descent is really good. There's one called Last Week in AI, and it's literally people just reading the news, right? And it's just like because like when you go on these social media sites and like people that you don't really care about are just reading the news to you and telling you how outraged they are, you're like, this is terrible. Why am I here? But when it's AI news, it's like, this is the only way for me to actually know what's going on. It's just like 2 hours of like headlines, right? And so just kind of downloading that. And there's some also obviously some classics. Radiolab has some awesome episodes about automation and that sort of thing. But yeah, those are kind of my core these days. Future Life Institute has some great. Actually, Future Life Institute has now really pushed into really focusing on artificial intelligence, and a lot of things they've been looking at existential threats from technology for a long time, but a lot of their content is about AI these days. The best resource I can think of, I absolutely love this guy. I don't know where he came from, but he's on YouTube, and the channel is called AI Explained. I truly like wake up in the morning and I check YouTube to see if there's new video coming out. Like it's like it's always so spot on and that sort of thing. So there's a bunch, and a ton of people are throwing stuff out there that's absolute nonsense as well. So you have to be careful with that. If there's ever in a headline, here's how you make money with AI, don't consume it.
Yeah, or AI expert says.
Just don't. Just stay as far away as possible. It's fun to watch. Maybe make a drinking game out of it or something. But other than that, it's absolute nonsense. So trying to consume as much as I can, and hopefully those are some good titles.
Those are great titles. I will throw all those in the episode show notes, and I will put your LinkedIn and your website if people want to get in touch with you. And thanks again. This is our third AI episode.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Well, you have my address. I'm going to want a t-shirt.
You will get your...
I want a picture of my own face turned into a robot.
I'm going to go to Goodwill and find you a Planet Fitness. I'll find you a Planet Fitness tee. So that's what you're going to get.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You said we just finished the episode about how the IRL is important. So I think a nice cotton Gildan will probably go pretty far for you.
You know what? What I love to do in Boston summer is go outside in a cotton shirt with the mist and the mud and the rain and just enjoy the heck out of life. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Planet Fitness, baby. This pod was not sponsored by Planet Fitness.
You'd think it was.
All right. Well, thanks, Andy, for coming on.
All right, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for checking out this episode of More Than Blockchain. And like I said in the intro, if you haven't heard the first 2 episodes with Andy, please go ahead and do so. I'm going to leave their links down in the show notes. As always, go ahead and follow us at More Than Blockchain on social media. Be sure to follow us on YouTube at More Than Blockchain as I put up different types of content there. And if you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and share it with a friend. We're in a time right now with technology, and especially AI, that I really think everyone should start to be thinking about how it may impact them. Even if it doesn't directly impact them, it may impact the employment or the lives of people they love, your friends or family. So I would say go ahead, please share this with someone that you know if you think that learning about AI adaptability is something that could be good for them. No matter where you're listening to the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. And thanks again for checking out this episode of More Than Blockchain. I'll see you next time.